I was in 8th grade when my school went into lockdown. At first, we thought it was just another drill until we heard the sirens. The principal's voice came over the intercom, shaky and urgent. "This is not a drill. Everyone lock your doors and stay silent." My teacher turned off the lights and we all huddled against the wall. It was dead silent except for the sound of slow, heavy footsteps in the hallway. They weren't rushing, they weren't panicked. They were deliberate. I was near the door and through the small glass window I could barely see something moving. A dark figure, tall, wearing what looked like a long coat, was walking past each classroom. But here's what made my stomach drop. He wasn't trying to get in. Instead, he stopped at each door, bending slightly as if listening. When he got to ours, I held my breath. My friend beside me started shaking. The figure stood there, unmoving for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and knocked 3 times, soft, rhythmic. Then he whispered in a voice so low I could barely make it out, "I see you." We all froze. My teacher motioned for us to stay quiet. Then the footsteps started again, fading down the hall. We sat there, terrified, until the lockdown was lifted. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I barely slept. The next day, whispers spread through the school. Other students in different classrooms had also seen the figure. Some swore they saw him staring directly at them through the window. Others claimed he had pressed his hands against the glass, leaving smudged prints that no one could explain. Later that week, the principal called an emergency assembly. He assured us that everything was fine, but we weren't convinced. One of the janitors, an older man who had worked at the school for decades, muttered something as I walked past him in the hallway. "It's happened before." That stopped me in my tracks. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he just shook his head and walked away. I did some digging after school, searching old news archives. I found an article from 20 years ago. It reported a man in a long black coat who had broken into the school during a lockdown drill. The details were eerily similar, but the part that sent chills down my spine, the man had been caught and had died in police custody. But if he was dead, who was walking the halls last week? That night, I woke up to a faint knocking at my bedroom window. 3 times, soft, rhythmic. I didn't check. I didn't want to know. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, a lingering fear from the previous day. But as I stepped outside to head to school, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch, a set of muddy footprints leading from my window and vanishing into the woods behind my house. I barely made it through the school day, paranoia creeping into every second. I jumped at every knock, every distant footstep. My friends teased me at first, but when I told them about the footprints, their laughter died quickly. That night, sleep was impossible. I left my blinds closed, but every small sound sent my heart racing. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. The sound wasn't coming from the window this time. It was coming from inside the house. My parents were asleep. My little brother's room was across the hall. Slowly, I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I texted my dad. "Are you awake? Someone's knocking." No response. Then the soft sound of footsteps, just outside my bedroom door. They stopped right at the threshold. I could hear the floor creak slightly under the weight of whatever was out there. I held my breath. My phone buzzed in my hand and I nearly screamed. It was my dad. "I'm still in bed. Don't move." The door handle turned. Just a little, a testing motion, slow and deliberate. I clamped my hands over my mouth, trying not to make a sound. Then, silence. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Finally, I heard my dad's heavy footsteps coming down the hall. He threw my door open and I gasped in relief. But when I looked past him into the hallway, it was empty. Nothing. No one. We searched the house, but there was no sign of a break-in. The locks were still bolted, the windows sealed. My dad tried to convince me it was just a bad dream, but I saw it in his eyes. He was just as disturbed as I was. The next day, I didn't go to school. I stayed home trying to shake the terror that had settled deep in my bones. By evening, I almost believed it was over, until I checked my phone. A new message from an unknown number. "I see you." I threw my phone across the room, my heart slamming against my ribs. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I asked my parents if we could move. They laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. And I never told them that some night.